Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today we're going over a complete guide as to setting up one of these things right here, which is a UGREEN NAS sync. And we're going to be installing UGOS, which is the actual built-in operating system for these NAS devices, and it's going to be set up for complete beginners to this. So going over all the way from just installing drives and getting everything hooked up, all the way to really getting to use it and be able to connect to files on it on your computers. So this right here is their 2-bay NAS. And the way you actually access the trays to put the hard drives in is pretty simple. Up at the front, there's just a little push button. Click it, pull it out, and this is what's called a toolless tray design. And it's pretty straightforward to go ahead and use. You simply slot your drive in if it's a 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive. You just make sure to line up these small little screw holes right here with your drive screw holes. And the metal teeth should be sticking out just like they are right here. And the way you access it is there's a little lever. You pull it open, put the hard drive in, and lock it back down. It is pretty straightforward. And that's pretty much it from the actual install perspective. There are also going to be slots for NVMe's for SSD caching, as well as RAM upgrades, and every single one of the units will have a different way of doing that. So if you've got one of those accessories, just refer to the manual. They've got a very easy diagram on how to access them and add them on in there. And that's pretty much it. So you want to just go ahead and kind of get everything plugged on in. And then we're going to go ahead and hook this thing up to the rest of our network and power on. So it's got a simple power supply in the back that you plug in. And the most important thing to all of this is the network port in the back. So whenever you're setting up a NAS, pretty much everything you're going to be doing over it is over Ethernet and Wi-Fi. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to place this thing next to your Wi-Fi router and plug it in via that little LAN cable in the back to the actual Wi-Fi router. Now, in an ideal world, if you're trying to get the absolute fastest possible speeds, so when you're copying large files of this thing, you will want to ideally plug your computer into the same either Wi-Fi router or network switch as the NAS is plugged into. So if your house is wired for Ethernet, that's awesome. And what you'll have is in your IT closet or wherever all those cables go into, there will be a big network switch that has a bunch of Ethernet ports on it. And you will want to plug this into that, or all those other cables go into the rest of your house. So as long as it's plugged into that network switch, everything else on the network can talk to it. So that's how you get the absolute best possible speeds out of it. However, if you are somebody who just has one office that needs the best speeds out of it, there's one more thing you can do. You can get a little network switch, and I'll leave a link down in the description below to one of these things that's 2.5 gigabit. And if you have a mesh Wi-Fi with those little satellites, in your office, what you can do is you can bring one of those satellites onto your desk, plug it into the network switch, plug the NAS also into the network switch, and then also plug your computer into that same network switch. And that way, the rest of the house is talking to the NAS over Wi-Fi, but your computer will get the full wired connection to it, and it'll be the fastest way to connect if you just have one really important computer or a few important computers in one room that you want to get the fastest possible speeds out of. We're not going to go over that too much in this video, but I did want to say that because that can make this a lot easier for people who are trying to get the fastest throughput. And so that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and set this thing up. We don't really need to worry about the USB ports, the HDMI port, or anything else for now. There's additional stuff you can do with those, but for now, we're doing a basic setup here. And so I'm going to go ahead and plug this on in and get my laptop out, and we're going to do the rest from a computer. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, our web developer, Visaggio Co. So if you remember back about a year ago, we went through a massive rebrand on the channel. New logos, new colors, as well as a brand new consulting arm, Yarborough Technologies, and we did this all with Matt. So he went through the entire process with us, actually recommended we spin this off, and I cannot speak highly enough of his services. He designed our logos, our website, our new colors, as well as sat down with us and developed a business plan for, hey, what do we want to market? What do we want to look for? How should we approach this? And his advice was honestly invaluable. We went through the entire pro and con of all the decisions with him and helped us figure out what we wanted to make this into. And genuinely, I cannot speak highly enough of him. If you're looking to take your business to the next level, check out Visaggio Co in the link in the description. They offer everything from marketing to branding to web development, all the way to developing a full-blown business plan and everything in between. Their work absolutely shows for itself, so check them out down in the link in the description, and thank you for sponsoring today's video. All right, so now I've got this thing plugged into my Wi-Fi router, in this case, network switch, and I've got my laptop hooked up over Wi-Fi, and it's powered on in. And now on my web browser, I'm going to go to find.ugnas.com, and it's going to do a quick scan and should find our device. If it does not, you're going to have a little bit more of a complex time. What I would really recommend doing is figuring out how to log into your router and seeing if you can find the IP address with it. So you'll see a UGREEN device on your network, but this is pretty reliable, so it probably will just work. We'll just hit connect. Now we're going to go ahead and name it and make this something that doesn't have any spaces in it, and go ahead and accept the EULA. Now we're going to go ahead and create ourselves an admin account. And to keep things really simple, this is going to be you, most likely. So I would just recommend putting your first name in there, or what you can also do, if you want to be super clear that it's the admin account for yourself, you need to add in like an admin underneath. But what I'll probably recommend for the vast majority of users is to go ahead and basically your main account, the one you actually log in with and use, is going to be the admin account. It just keeps it a lot simpler. In bigger office environments, it's very common to have two accounts. So if I'm the IT guy for a company, I will normally have two accounts. One, my regular account that I use all day to answer emails, do files, and do my regular job that does not require admin privileges. And then a separate account that is an admin. And the reason that people will do this and companies do this is it kind of helps people remember, hey, I am needing to escalate. I'm needing to do something that requires additional permissions. And it also means that if something does happen to my main account, it does not have nearly as much access as the admin account. But for something like a UGREEN, I would not worry about that too much. So we're just going to go ahead and come up with a username and a password. If you are going to be having this exposed to the internet, make sure to make that a strong password. Then the other thing I would recommend doing is if you want to get email notifications, I would recommend throwing in your email right here. And just go ahead and verify the email. What this will allow it to do is if there's a problem, it'll be able to just send you an email, which is quite nice. Then our next section right here is talking about automatic updates. For the vast majority of people, I would recommend either automatically install all updates or install important updates. Then if you are going to be using this thing as like a VM data store, then having only manual updates makes sense. However, it's probably not going to be used for that. So I would really recommend getting those automatic security updates. So if there is a vulnerability found, it can be patched automatically without you having to do anything. And especially if you're going to be having this accessible to the internet, definitely look at that. And we're going to go ahead and just have that important updates and hit initialize. All right, now it's just going to go ahead and do its regular install stuff. So we're just going to fast forward all through this and we'll meet back up after this is done. All right, so now it is done installing and we're just going to go through and they've got this nice little, hey, here's how you get started, but that's what you're watching right now. You can just go ahead and skip on through that. All right, so now that that's done, the very first thing we need to do is we need to basically configure our hard drives. UGREEN actually installs the actual operating system, so like this UGOS that we're on right now, to an internal storage device that you don't actually see. It's actually on the motherboard. And for the larger unit, it's actually a separate M.2 NVMe. Then all of your actual data, the files, what you are putting on the NAS is stored on whatever drives you put up front, either 2.5-inch SSDs or full-size 3.5-inch mechanical hard drives. And then you're going to combine however many of these drives you got together into a storage pool with RAID. So to do that, we're going to go into storage and we're going to go ahead and follow this, which will help us get us set on up. So the first thing we need to do is create what's called a storage pool. And there's a lot of options for setting this on up, but the first thing you want to do is select your RAID. So I'm going to go ahead and select the 2 drives that I've got in here. And if you've got like an NVMe SSD cache, don't add that just yet. Only select the actual devices that you're planning on doing for your bulk storage. And then we've got a few different options depending on how we want to configure this thing. If you're looking for redundancy, meaning that if one of the drives fails, you keep all your data and you keep going, then you're going to want to select either RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 6. Otherwise, if you choose RAID 0 or JBOD or BASIC, if you lose any one of your drives, all of your data is gone. And so I really recommend setting up a redundant RAID. So that's going to be RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6. Would not recommend RAID 10, but that's out of scope of this video. And so for this, we're going to select RAID 1. RAID 5 requires at least 3 hard drives, and RAID 6 requires at least 4 hard drives. But we're going to go ahead and select RAID 1, and we can see right here that even though we've got two 500 gigabyte SSDs, we are only getting 500 gigabytes of space because RAID 1 will mirror them. Then if this was a larger unit with 4 drives in it, and I selected RAID 5, it would essentially take one of those drives for redundancy and give me the storage of the rest. RAID 6 is the same thing, but 2 drives. And with RAID 5, I can lose one of my hard drives, and because of really cool stuff called parity math, it allows us to just keep going. So in a RAID 5 configuration, if you've got 4 hard drives in a RAID 5 configuration, and one of them fails, you just keep chugging along, you stick in a new drive, it rebuilds itself the whole time the NAS is accessible. And so there's tons to talk about there, and I'll leave a link down in the description below to my RAID Explained that really goes in depth for all of these things. But definitely check out this graph right here to show you how much space you're actually going to be getting out of it. And then I would recommend setting up this hard drive test as well, but I'm going to skip through that for this tutorial because I'm going to be formatting this later on. Then next up, we're going to choose our storage pool. I would highly recommend selecting BTRFS. BTRFS is a file system that supports a lot of really useful things that will help you protect your data in the long term. The number one is going to be snapshots, which allow any of your users to mess up and essentially allows you to roll back very easily. There are a ton of other really useful things that BTRFS does, checksums and other things like that with data scrubbing that allow your data to get corrupted and then repaired. So one of your hard drives can flip a 1 to a 0, and BTRFS can detect and fix it without you doing anything. So it's a very great file system for protecting your data long term. For the more advanced users out there, you may have seen some stuff about don't use RAID with BTRFS. UGREEN's implementation of BTRFS RAID is sound. They do the exact same thing as Synology, where you actually have your normal ADM running the RAID and then putting a BTRFS volume on top of it and never actually using BTRFS RAID. So it is quite stable, and they did copy Synology's implementation of that, which is the right thing to do there. And Synology's been running this setup for about 10 years plus now, and it's been very, very, very sound. So I'm very comfortable recommending it. And BTRFS just gives you so many powerful features that can save your files and your NAS so easily. So what I would recommend for the vast majority of users, unless you really know what you're doing and why you're doing it, is to have a single volume allocated with 100% of your space with BTRFS. And we're just going to go ahead and hit create. And we're going to go ahead and format it. There's nothing on there. But if you were somebody who was, maybe storing a bunch of really important data on these and thinking you had carried over, stop, don't hit that button. Your data will be formatted. So these need to be new drives or just drives with data on them that you don't care about, because during this process, it will format your data. And so now it's going to go through and actually set up our data. RAID 1 will make this run very, very, very quickly. If you've got RAID 5 with really big drives and RAID 6 with really big drives, this can take a couple of days. Keep the NAS on for the duration of it, but you're welcome to start using it. It's just going to be a little bit slower at the beginning than what it will be at the end. And so it's just going to go ahead and sync, but know that's what's happening. And now we want to go ahead and set up some really useful things that is going to help protect our data in the long term. So for me, because I've got SSDs in this, I want to come in here and click on this trim optimization option. And we want to make sure SSD trimming is on, and we can actually set a plan to say when we want trimming to occur. I would say once a month makes a lot of sense. And the time, I would probably choose maybe 1 a.m. Basically what'll happen is it's going to just run this trim that helps protect your SSDs in the long term by saying what can and cannot be deleted, and makes them perform a little bit faster as well. and it will be a little slow when you do this. So running it at midnight or when you're not using it as much is a great idea. All right, cool. Now the last thing I want to show you is, let's say this was a 4-bay NAS and I only started with 2 SSDs and I wanted to add a third later on. Well, I can actually convert this RAID 1 to RAID 5 by adding another drive, and what'll happen is I'll actually double my space. So later on when that does happen, you come in here and click change RAID type and convert it to RAID 5, and you'll keep all of your data. It'll just shuffle the data around. It'll take a few days, the whole time the NAS will be usable, and then at the end of it, you just now have added that extra drive in. And you can also, once you're doing that, expand your storage pool by adding another drive as well. And so this is not locked down. You can keep growing it as you get more data and more drives on in. If you are running RAID 5, you'll also want to come in here to this data organizing section and set up a data scrub, or a RAID scrub in that case. And eventually UGREEN should be adding a BTRFS scrub in here as well, but they have not done that yet. So schedule it for every 3 months when you're running RAID 5 or RAID 6, and it'll just run in the background and you'll pretty much forget about it. All right, cool. So now we have our storage pool and our RAID and our volume. So they're kind of like rushing nesting dolls. And for most people, unless you have like a hard drive volume and an SSD volume, you probably only should have 1 RAID, 1 storage pool, and 1 volume. Otherwise, you're just making things unnecessarily complex. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do is create another shared folder now. Shared folder is actually where we're going to be storing our data that multiple people on this NAS can access it. So we come into the Files application on the left right here. You can see that there is a personal folder and a shared folder, yada, yada, yada. Let's see, skip this. So our personal folder is going to be just for the user logged in. So right now I'm signed in with an account called Will. So Will is going to have his own personal folder, and every time I create a new user on the system, they're going to get their own personal folder. In Synology terms, it's the home versus homes folder. And so we're going to go ahead and enable that personal folder, which is other systems is the home folder in Linux. Now we're going to choose the home folder to be on volume 1 and follow these defaults right here. And so now we will see that I get my own personal folder, and as the administrator, I can also see everyone else's personal folders or home folders. So I can click on the user folder and I can see what every single one of my users has stored in their home folder. And so that is how that works. Really, this folder right here is the exact same thing as this folder right here. Because I'm currently signed in with Will, there's a user called Bob. We'd see another user folder right here called Bob. And when Bob logged in, Bob's personal folder would be under the user folder Bob. It's a bit confusing at first, but it's pretty much just like your Windows users folder, your macOS users folder, your Linux home folder. It is pretty straightforward, but what you're really going to want to be using the vast majority of the time is a thing called a shared folder. Shared folders are what contains your actual data that you're going to be storing on here. And in general, I recommend you don't have more than maybe 5 or 6 of these, and really these should be set up for different use cases. So if you're doing photography and videography, I would really recommend having a shared folder for Lightroom and photography, because the way you access it is a lot different than the way you will be editing off of this. And so in general, for most people, if you've got more than 5 or 6, you're doing something a little weird, and maybe think about simplifying on down. And all you have to do is create one. And so this is also where we're going to be having our permissions. So let's just start with a family folder that is going to serve all of our family documents. So we're going to create a new shared folder. So we're going to say everybody in our family can access it. And now we get to say who has access. I'm an administrator, so I already have access. But if you had more users, you'd be able to give them different accesses. In general, if you're using this access denied, you're probably doing something wrong. By default, nobody will have any access to this, and then you add permissions. So don't hit access denied unless you really know what you're doing, and if you find yourself doing that often, I'd say you're probably doing something wrong. All right, and so now we've got this family folder, and we could click into it and upload files to it, but that's not how you should be using the NAS. And so instead, we want to hook this thing up via a protocol called SMB, so we can just do it in macOS Finder, Windows File Explorer, or whatever your Linux file manager is, they can all connect to SMB shares, and it's generally under the Network tab. It's very easy, and it's built into pretty much all operating systems. So the first time you set the thing up, you just have to enable it by coming into Control Panel, File Service, and enable the SMB service, and hit Apply. Here, it'll tell you how to access it via different things, but by default, you'll just see it show up under the sidebar over here under Network, and then you should see it under the name you set up for it, and you just click on it. And first time it'll ask for your username and password, and then it'll show us all of our shared folders, as well as our personal folder. And so you see when I click on them, the way macOS works is it connects to them, and you can see right here that they are now a thing called mounted. And this is where I'm actually going to be working on the files. This is where I'm actually going to be doing everything. You're not logging into the actual web interface to manage your files. No, you actually come in here and directly through your file browser, you will be able to copy and paste files and move stuff around exactly like an external hard drive. Just copy stuff straight on into it. And that's pretty much it. On Windows, there's also an additional option to do a thing called mapping a network drive. So you just right click on these drive letters in Windows and you say map network drive and make them a drive letter, but nothing's too complex there. And this is really what a NAS is the network attached storage. So it's really basically having a hard drive just on your network. This will only work locally. You will not be able to get this to work remotely without setting up a thing called a VPN, but that is going to be out of the scope for this tutorial. So the only way you'll be able to mount these drives in this way is when you're actually on the same local network as the NAS, or if you've set up your own VPN. UGREEN does not have one right now, but in the future, I'm imagining they will. You would be able to connect to it in that way, but once again, that is out of the scope of this tutorial. All right, so that right there is the dumb basics of setting up the NAS. But there's a couple of things we really need to make sure to do to make sure that we can protect ourselves in case something goes wrong. And the number one thing there is going to be a thing called snapshots. This is why we selected BTRFS. Snapshots are going to allow us to undo things very easily and really protect ourselves. So I've got a tutorial on it, but realistically, we can just set it up and do it right here very easily. We're going to come into the App Center and search Snapshot and install the Snapshot utility. By the way, this is your App Center. You can see that there's a lot of additional apps that are installed and you can add in to be able to extend the functionality, and they'll all show up in your app drawer in the upper left-hand corner right here. So they've got ones that allow it to run a actual video server. So if you've got a lot of DVD rips, you can play them all back here. Same thing for photos and music. There's a whole lot of options here to go ahead and do. I want to point out a few common ones. Docker is really useful if you want to do even more. Docker allows you to kind of install other people's apps and packages and services on your own NAS. It's kind of like a universal installer that allows you to take somebody who's created a thing called Nextcloud, and without having to build a virtual machine on your own server, make sure it's compatible and everything. Instead, Docker allows them to package it in a specific way and ship it to you where you can very easily follow their install instructions and get it running on pretty much any hardware. I will go ahead and I will be doing other tutorials on how to set up Docker and all that stuff, but if you're used to Docker, it's pretty easy to go, and it just works on pretty much every single device on the planet. Windows, Mac, Linux, all run Docker very nicely, and so it's so expansive on what it can do. Then scrolling up, another really useful one is sync and backup. One of my favorite ways to start with a backup is to install an external hard drive on this thing. So just go buy an external hard drive. I'll leave a link down in the description below to one, and plug it into the NAS. And essentially with this sync and backup option, you can tell the NAS every night anything that's changed, copy to this external hard drive. It's like $200 to $300, and it can save you. It is a great one-time fee that is a full backup of everything that's really important. And I would really recommend setting one up. And I will be doing a specific tutorial on that in the future, but it's one of those things that can really save you, because having an offsite backup is great, but it does have an expense associated with it. So having a hard drive plugged into the NAS will protect you from so many things, and I really recommend looking at it because it really can help you. RAID is not a backup, and snapshots are not a backup, but actually having a separate device copy every single night anything that's changed is a true backup, and it'll protect you from anything weird that might happen on the NAS. These things are very robust, but weird stuff happens, and it absolutely is worth, if your data is important, to have that backup. And then finally, the last thing to check out would be the cloud drives. This will allow you to sync with something like Google Drive or Dropbox, and they're adding in things as it goes on. So this is how you can go ahead and say, hey, I want to back up my NAS to OneDrive. But that's for a different tutorial. Now what we're going to do is we are going to set up those snapshots that I told you are really important. And I'm going to show you why. So we open up Snapshots. We have to have BTRFS to do this. So if you don't have BTRFS, you can't set up snapshots. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select every single shared folder and user folder and hit this settings button and create a snapshot plan as well as a retention policy. These settings tell you how often to take a snapshot. And a snapshot is kind of like a version through macOS Time Machine, or it's a volume shadow copy in Windows. It's essentially the ability to go back and restore files exactly as they were when the snapshot was taken. And it's not copying the data, it's not duplicating the data. So if you take a snapshot every day, it's not like your 2 terabyte folder increases in size by 2 terabytes every day. No, the only thing they do is they kind of act like a recycling bin. So they'll kind of hold on to your files and not let them actually get fully deleted from the actual drives themselves. And so you'll be able to restore them for as long as you've got that snapshot. There's a lot of stuff in here, but from a simplicity perspective, what I would recommend most people do is take a snapshot every day. Midnight makes a lot of sense. And then keep your retention for 30 days. What this will do is this will protect you by allowing you to restore files or even the entire folder itself for 30 days. The most common example of this is ransomware, and this is where it can be a game changer. Let's say one of your users clicks a bad link on their computer and gets a virus on their computer. Well, that user has read-write to the NAS. That's how it works, right? You want them to be able to work on it. That means the virus will start encrypting all the files it has access to, one of them being the NAS drive. And they're not going to show up in the recycling bin because they are not actually deletes. They're just modified to an encrypted file format that you have to pay some Bitcoin to restore. Well, if you have snapshots on, these snapshots can't be encrypted by that virus. They are read-only. So if that happens, it is a one-click restore. I cannot express how valuable these things are, and really make sure to set them up. I get calls about probably once a week to twice a month where somebody's freaking out thinking that they've just destroyed everything on their NAS, and I can restore it very quickly with snapshots. By the way, I do professional IT consulting. There's a link down in the description below if you want to hire me and set these things up for you. But definitely, every time you create a new shared folder, make sure to add snapshots. You will thank me. Now, as a quick overview on what this storage is actually going to take up. So snapshots don't take up any space if you never delete any files. The only time they ever take up space is if you delete a file, they kind of don't allow that space to be reclaimed instead. Same thing if you do a modification. So if you edit a Photoshop document, it'll still have an original copy of that Photoshop somewhere on disk. And so instead of thinking about how much space they're actually going to take up, you should really kind of think of them more like a recycling bin on steroids. A recycling bin doesn't take up any space if nobody ever deletes any files. But if you have a recycling bin that gets cleared out after 30 days and somebody deletes 3 terabytes of files, well, that recycling bin is going to take up 3 terabytes of space for 30 days. The exact same way that snapshots work, except snapshots are so much more powerful. And so that's the overview of that. We're going to go ahead and just show it really quick, but I'm going to go ahead and just set that. And there's this little useful option, take a manual snapshot. I cover this much more in depth in another tutorial that I'll leave a link down in the description below. So I'm just taking a couple of snapshots here. And now, let's say that I accidentally get that virus and it encrypts this, right? So basically, one of my users got a virus on their computer and it encrypted a good portion of the NAS. In this case, it was everything. Well, if I didn't catch it in time, maybe my backups don't have versions. UGREEN does not have those just yet. So also my backups are there. But with snapshots, you can restore it. You can roll it back. All you have to do is come into this snapshot folder and check out this snapshot list. And you can just restore these files as they were at this time. There is extended functionality that I'm assuming they will eventually add into the system that allows it to be even more powerful. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to roll this entire thing back exactly as it was before that virus hit. So this is that demo 2 that I took. I'm just going to click the restore button. And just like that, it's like it never happened. The whole system was rolled back. That entire shared folder was rolled back to the version I selected. And it took a matter of moments. This is great because if you've got a petabyte system, it'll do this instantaneously as well. Really, really, really cool thing, and why you absolutely want to set up snapshots. There's more stuff it can do. I'll leave a link down in the description below to that tutorial that really shows it off, but this is why it's so important and something you should not forget to set up. And then you'll set up the exact same settings on your user folders and all additional shared folders you add. All right, so now the last thing I want to cover on this is going to be going over our control panel right here and making sure we can set up some users. So under user management, what we'll do is every user who's interacting with an NAS, we are going to create a new user account for them. Let's do Bob. We'll generate a random password for them. And we are going to go ahead and just have them be a common user. But you can also give them administrator access if it's like your business partner or whatever. And there's also user groups that you can go for even more complex stuff. I'm really glancing over this for now though. And then we are going to go ahead and hit next and say what permission they have. We are going to give Bob read-write access to that family folder, but we could also give them read-only access. And now Bob, under their credentials, can just log in and be able to start working off this stuff. And now if we need to give Bob less permission, more permission, we can do that very easily. There's also logs that show who did what, and so it's really useful to have everybody have their own username and password for the NAS, as it just allows you to figure out what happened if anything goes wrong, and other great things. I would also come into these advanced settings and set a minimum of 8 characters for the password. I would not recommend having the password ever expire, and I would add in 1 number, 1 letter for things, as well as not common and no usernames. So what I would probably do is all of these settings right here, as they're just good secure passwords, especially if you're going to be opening this thing up to the internet. All right, so now that's the end of the basic stuff to get you up and running. Now I want to go in and spend a little bit of time on more of the advanced stuff to just see where everything is at. If you're just getting started, you can come back to this later on, but there's some really useful things to understand here. First off is going to be under the File Service tab. The vast majority of the time you're going to be accessing this thing is going to be over SMB. That's that Windows protocol that everything can use. And so if you're seeing it in your network, it's over a thing called SMB. There are some advanced settings here, and default settings here are pretty solid. You can also view your logs to actually see what users were doing on there, but everything here is pretty easy. Adding in asynchronous read under more can help really speed up your actual connections if you are somebody like a video editor. FTP is another option, which you probably don't need to use anymore, but if you are running an FTP server, make sure to run FTPS, which is certificate based, but honestly, it's not that necessary in this day and age. Remote access of files should really be done over a VPN server, but if you are hooking up to like a camera to dump off of it, that's where you do that here. NFS do not enable this unless you understand how to use NFS properly, as you can very easily mess up your security posture and give anybody access to files. So I really recommend don't touch NFS unless you understand what a VLAN is and how to separate the traffic on off and other things like that. rsync is a great way to be able to have devices back up to the NAS itself. rsync is very common on Linux and basically allows you to have an interface to copy files from something like a true NAS server. Synology, most things can fire off files to an rsync server, so that is where you'd find that. WebDAV is a very useful way to access files remotely, and if you're somebody who's wanting to use macOS Time Machine, you'll set up Bonjour right here and set up a Time Machine folder. All right, so that's the quick overview of the file services. Under the device connection, one thing you might not have realized that you enabled at the beginning was the UGREENlink remote address. You will want to go ahead and either disable this or use it. So when you enable this, now the NAS is accessible from the internet. It is through a relay server on their end, so it's not like it's directly accessible, but it does go ahead and open that stuff up. So if you want to use that, you can customize this right here and be able to actually access this thing anywhere in the world through their relay server. So I'm just going to pick a name. This is kind of like a web address, a URL. So it's got to be globally unique. And now I can just open a new tab, paste that on in, and get into my UGREEN. So it's not going to be super fast, but especially if you just need to grab a couple files, that's a very easy way of doing it. Now, if you just want this thing accessible locally, you can uncheck that box, and now it is only accessible on the local network. Next up, under hardware and power, the only thing I would really touch here is going to be under power. I'm a big fan for auto boot after loss of power. This means that if your power goes out, this will come back on whenever it's there. And if you have a UPS, especially one with a USB port, you can go ahead and plug that in here and it will tell the NAS, hey, power's out, my battery is starting to run low, go ahead and safely shut down. So if there's an extended power outage, your NAS does not have a hard power loss. Instead, the NAS just turns itself off before the battery dies. Under network, if you understand how to set up static IP addresses, you can do that here. What I would say to do more likely than not is if you're one of the more advanced users, instead what I would recommend doing is log into your router and give it what's called a DHCP reservation. So that way you can always use that IP address. But if you're used to that stuff, you know where all that stuff is right here. But don't go ahead and setting static IP addresses unless you know what you're doing. Under security, we've got really good basic defaults right here. So auto blocking IP addresses 10 times within 5 minutes is a great thing to do. You can also go ahead and automatically unblock after 1 day, which I tend to recommend doing. So if you accidentally lock yourself out, it's just going to be 24 hours till you can get back in. It's not very useful to have this more restrictive. Basically, if somebody knows the user's password, they're going to be able to get it very quickly without ever hitting these limits, even very tight limits. And if they don't know a user's password, this will take 2.5 million years to brute force somebody. Under account security, this is where you can enable 2FA. So especially if you're accessing this thing from the internet, having 2FA on is a really great idea, but we're not going to touch that right now. You probably do not need a firewall unless you know what you're doing, because your router is your firewall. And this is where you can manage SSL certificates. Finally, down at the bottom, we've got the update and restore option. This is where you can go in and actually update your unit. So basically, as UGREEN has updates, you can go ahead and update them right here. And so those are the basic settings to get this thing off the ground. There's a whole lot more stuff this thing can do, and there's a lot of applications you can work on, but this is the base functionality of a NAS and how to get started. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below as well. And have a good one. Bye.